This guy, yeah.
All right, well, it's time to call our meeting to order. I want to welcome all of City Council and our Chief and Patrick. Thank you as well for your participation in Title VIII, and for Chief for starting to take such a good interest in our code enforcement and changing it into a neighborhood initiative that's more positive based. I was hoping Dolly would be here because I wanted to hear about how her albino deer naming contest is coming
Oh, we've
along.
gotten a lot of submissions. We're going to narrow it down to like 3 or 4 and then let people vote on those last 3 or 4. One of my suggestions is in the top category.
Oh, snow.
Snowflake.
Snowflake. Any other favorites?
Right now, Snowball is leading by neck.
And it's a boy,
Really?
so
Yeah.
Yeah, so
I think
it's
that's more
confirmed a
appropriate.
boy.
Yes.
Is it a
Yeah.
male?
It's got
male?
little horns budding.
Yeah.
Oh,
Wow.
Yeah.
I can tell from my kitchen
Well, it was
window.
on one of the,
My wife's was El Blanco. They're like.
that's
did
not
she
bad.
submit it?
Yes,
Kind of
yes.
like El Chapo.
There was a little play on that. He might be a contributor.
Well, it is nice to have a mascot. Okay, so we're going to finish conquering Title VIII today. Patrick, I believe we left off at around page 33. Do you have a spot you want us to pick up
Well,
from?
before we begin, a little bit of a preamble. As you know, these staff reports are usually prepared a couple of weeks in advance of when council actually conducts a hearing on them. And at the time we wrote this, code enforcement was still a function within community development. As of Monday night, that is not the case any longer. However, because the revamp of Title VIII, our sort of junk drawer ordinance section of the code, we were the ones that sort of picked up the baton and tried to carry this forward about a year and a half ago. And even though Title VIII is no longer a function that community development is tasked with enforcing, we kind of wanted to at least carry this across the finish line. So the sections of this staff report that have to deal with the protocols for enforcement and whatnot, I'm going to sort of slide that over to our police chief here now that that's a function of our police department. But we can certainly at this point pick up where we left off. I'd like to kind of go over the changes that we are making based upon the feedback we got on January 23rd. That's in the staff report. We didn't give you a revised red line version of this, and that was at the discretion of our city attorney because she felt when you begin getting into multiple iterations of red lines, you generate multiple colors and it becomes very confusing to the reader. So we figured what we do is in the staff report, give you the very basic either strike-through text or highlighted text to reflect the changes that were being made. And then from there, we can discuss, I think from page 33 on, where you feel you want to go with the remainder of the code.
Okay,
So if you
And-
turn,
And can I just add to Patrick just a little bit? I know that we talked about last time that administrative resolution and those protocols, and I guess I would suggest maybe you consider, since Derek's really like coming on board today, that maybe we come back to that at a time when Derek can get up to speed a little bit and have a really fruitful conversation with you all about the administrative protocols and the enforcement of Title VIII, and maybe move on to Title IX today and get through that. That's pretty simple. So just a suggestion, maybe something.
but wouldn't some of the things that we want to see in the administrative side also be applicable to Derek as well?
They would. He's just not as familiar with the protocols for code enforcement, and it's a little bit different than it is enforcing criminal matters under the code. And so he's being kind of thrown into this today, and I don't know how fruitful that conversation will be for you all
Well,
today.
our suggestion would be, if you have, and I think there were some valid issues and concerns last time, that you articulate them and we'll bring them back to you. But basically, it's your code. You tell us how you want it interpreted and enforced, and we'll do that.
Yeah, I think that would be important, so you know when you're creating the neighborhood initiative where our heart kind of
Yeah.
lies.
Madam Chair, I'd like to jump in here before we get started too far, because I've got a couple of comments on what we've done so far. In reading, I'm looking at page 16, 8.26 littering, okay, under B1.
16.
And it says, "The city shall abate the nuisance by immediately removing." In our staff report, we took out the immediately and said, put in without notice. And so I don't know if that's if that change is just hung up in the, you know, the different versions we've got or what. Page 16.
So as
Of the ordinance?
As Patrick mentioned, we did not give you a new red line this time.
Okay, so they're,
Yeah, these are from September.
Because they were so
okay, so that was,
limited in number, I didn't want to throw another red line with another color in it at you, and
Okay,
you try to
all right.
like, okay, yellow was first, and then green was second, so we just did them in the
Yeah,
staff report.
so on January 23rd, we heard that you wanted the text changed to read without notice, and that's reflected in the staff report. But you
Correct.
did not
Correct.
get a revised Title 8
okay.
to show that.
So how about we see that staff report, then we can make, then you can check and make sure they caught
I do
the
have
things that
it,
you
we
want.
have the
Yeah.
staff report,
Yeah.
yes.
Which, it would seem like it would make sense to cover that staff report because it revolves the changes we talked about
Yeah.
and then move forward.
Okay, so go ahead.
So if you go to page 3 of the staff report, under section 8.12 definitions, we were asked to add the term stormwater easements and conveyances before water lines under paragraph UU to the definition of right-of-way or ROW.
Where are we?
This
That's
is,
not on
this
my
is page
page
3 of
three.
the staff report.
Yeah.
Is that 8 as well?
I'm sorry?
8.12?
8.12, yes.
Okay.
Okay. Okay,
Okay. So then, under section 8.18, we added a couple of provisions based upon, I don't think we had specific wording, but we had a concept that council wanted to secure, and that was, under paragraph E, 8.18.010, the language, "The above provision shall not apply to any use of a window or opening in a facade which advertises or displays items or services available from a business located inside the building." That was to accommodate the fact that obviously we have some businesses that use their windows for display purposes, and we wanted to make sure that didn't fall into the category of a blocked or obstructed window or opening in the building. We also,
And Patrick, I have a question on that that's kind of developed since our last meeting, and that would be some of the window wrapping that has been done at the Apex and the Hotel St. Cloud, because it is technically a covering of the window, but it's very aesthetic, educational, and
What's
we
the
attempted to address
Yeah.
situations like that and get to the next page. Under paragraph 1, if adequate evidence is provided that the construction or reconstruction schedule will exceed 30 days, this period may be administratively extended up to an additional 60 days. That has to do with the licensing for reconstructive efforts. And then we get to paragraph 3 at the top of page 4. This is the paragraph that hopefully addresses the window wrapping concern that you raised. Paragraphs 1 and 2 above shall apply in circumstances where the obstruction of the window, door, or means of ingress and egress is inside the facade of this building. Obstructions placed on the outside of a facade are permitted only in cases of damage to fenestration as a result of inclement weather or criminal activity. In such cases, the obstruction may exist for a period not to exceed 14 days from the date of the incident. So with that, what we're saying is, okay, if you board up a window from outside the building, you can have 14 days. If you do wrapping on the inside of the building, you can get 30 days, plus if we have evidence that construction is going on that will exceed that 30-day limit, it can be extended by an additional 60 days.
You may want to expand that to an unlimited amount of time based upon our administrative view. For the St. Cloud's a perfect illustration of that. It was months that they've had those windows covered up purposely and rightfully, so 60 days would not have done them any good.
No,
Or we
and
could do it in
it'll
60-day
continue.
increments for as long as it takes.
Just trust our
Because it's
judgment.
the intent and purpose is
Yeah.
educational, it's
Wanna be-
historical, it's also aesthetic and helps block out the,
But fundamentally, it's not any different than Fourth and Main.
except for Fourth and Main has barricades on the outside of the
Yeah.
window
Where are these at?
instead of the inside.
Inside.
The inside. And they're not
There's,
barricades, that you could still break through that window if you
Yeah,
needed
they're
an
inside.
egress.
The window
I
treatment.
thought that stuff was on the outside.
No.
A wrapping is different than plywood if you needed to escape.
Yeah, but the wrapping is on the outside.
No, I think behind glass, isn't it?
I think that kind of wrapping, I think that one's on the outside.
That's on the outside of that building.
Press thing they do.
Oh,
Yeah, when I passed by it today, it was definitely on the outside.
it's on the outside.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at it, it's stuck on the outside of the building.
So then should we take the direction of something that can be broken in, you know, for safety purposes rather than inside or outside or?
Well, I think that's where the question kind of came on our sign, is it the signage? Because we wanted to make sure that empty buildings were able to still be able to have beautiful displays in their windows to help enhance the downtown.
Tell people what's
And
coming.
this is one of those examples.
It would seem to me that wrapping could probably fairly easily be moved inside the windows, too.
Well, I think the question is, and I'm sorry, I'm trying not to get too involved, especially coming here lately, but I'm hearing what you're saying there, that it's more about the aesthetics. But I think really, from a regulatory standpoint, it should be a health safety issue, not we like your display over the other one, or it's inside versus it's outside. I think if we get into the weeds with that, then Fourth and Main would obviously become, that would be a point of, you're enforcing this on me, but not on others.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, we need to be really careful
So if we
with
look
that.
at it as like a safety issue, you know, if there's an emergency, can you get through that window? With wrapping, you can still break the window. With plywood, it makes it a lot more difficult.
Well, that would depend upon the material that you use for a wrapping, because some wraps are intended
Yeah.
to help prevent entry and safety.
And so maybe we go that route and just say, if you want something on the windows, it's got to be something that can be broken if somebody needs to get in or out. Because my thought is, if we go to it with like the safety direction, then we're not targeting Fourth and Main for putting
Yeah.
plywood up.
That was the original intent, to ensure that police, fire could look into a structure and see if there's any individuals there, if anyone's under duress. That was the intent.
Well, and a difference too between the two properties is on the St. Cloud, they still have openings of windows where you can still look on the inside of the building and see,
Some of these
whereas some of the others you can't.
If we open it up on the route of a window covering has to be accessible in an emergency situation, then, and Patrick, you might be able to help me with this a little bit better, but instances where we have businesses that have bars on their windows that clearly wouldn't be able to be entered easily in an emergency situation, does the code currently address that?
No, it does not.
So I think if we start going down that route, there may be some other unintended consequences that are associated with that. So again, I'm not trying to let Title VIII continue, but I do want to clarify that, you know, at least moving forward from the police department's concerns, it would be that if there is an individual, whether it's Fourth and Main or it's the St. Cloud Hotel, that we focus primarily on health and safety issues rather than aesthetics.
You know, I hear a couple things, and I know with signage, at least I've been told that you can't, there's a percentage coverage. Would something for the film that goes on there can't exceed, because some of what I'm hearing, they want to be able to see in as a safety factor. It couldn't exceed, there got to be 10% clear so the person could have visioned inside, or the other route to go down is during construction. Because we still have building inspectors and people going out there during construction, and that's fair. The other way is renewed every 60 days, which might be a pain, because I think St. Cloud is probably a 2-year deal. Yeah. And I think the old bank was the same way. But maybe if we talked about percentage coverage, because I think signage, you can't exceed more than 20% or something. I don't know, is that still in the code? I'm probably old-fashioned, but.
You do not have any window signage percentages in your code, correct, Patrick?
No, not at present.
No, that hasn't been there.
No,
And
I
that's
was-
one thing Dino
That's a
would
good
like to
idea.
conquer in the sign code is to have that percentage in there, so it's really clear cut,
common.
like it's
Yeah.
25% of the window or whatever the number
Yeah,
is.
and I think that would be well, it was 80% or 90%. That's measurable and quantifiable. It also takes care of the possibility of a safety factor that I think if you were standing on the sidewalk, you could see flames if you had some clear. So that, I don't know if that's a fair balance. I think the signage I was talking about is a commercial sign on the side of a building, not a window.
And there is a
I-
percentage.
There's a percentage. So I don't know if that gets you where you want to go. 60 days seems reasonable, but when you have these projects, it's
Sure.
not. I think it's 2 years or something like that. So I don't know if that helps any or not.
Catherine, do you have any suggestions?
Well, I guess, I mean, I'm going to kind of echo Derek a little bit. I mean, I think we can't legislate for every situation. Now, I don't know what the wrapping is on the St. Cloud building. I'm not really sure I understand what's going on there, but I think the purpose is to not have windows blocked for health, safety, welfare. And so we're not going to be able to figure out every situation in this code. And, you know, I think we can expand the amount of time if there's like an active building permit or something like that. I don't see that as a big issue. I understand some projects are going to take a substantial amount of time. I think staff probably feels that way too. so.
My recommendation would be you do it in 60-day increments and just keep extending that.
And how easy are we going to make it to extend? Is it just picking up the phone and saying, hey, we need another 60 days, or?
No, as long as we have an active building permit, yeah,
can just
it should just be almost automatic at
Okay.
that point.
Yeah, so it could even be the building inspector.
Does that sound reasonable and business-friendly to you, Tony?
Yeah, I would prefer a longer period of time. I mean.
Longer than 60 days?
administratively, Yeah, I'd prefer unlimited based upon the situation at hand. Just leave it to our discretion. I mean, we're going to be practical. St. Cloud's, I don't want, if that's a 2-year project, I don't want them in Rhinemus have every 60 days, I got to make sure they get a
Goes
rollover on
really
their
fast.
permit.
It sounds like every 6
You know,
months or
that-
something.
That's too much for me to handle.
Or, you know, as long as there's an active building permit
Yeah.
in place,
Keep
then.
it simple, keep it simple.
Yeah.
Which they don't have.
Oh,
They
they
will
don't?
have it once they
Well,
start.
they don't have it
Yeah,
now.
yeah,
But we don't have the ordinance passed yet, so,
If we did.
yeah.
yeah.
It seems like the common ground there would be is 60 days beyond the active permit. So if they have an active construction permit, 60 days beyond that is more than enough time, because if it does take 2 years as a construction project, clearly there are several checks and balances through the building department to make sure that that permit is moving forward, and there are timelines associated with that. But the window covering beyond the 60 days, that could potentially be extended, because again, there's circumstances where 60 days beyond the building construction permit expiration may need to be extended as well. But that's one that I think would make more common sense, that
But it shouldn't just be tied to a construction permit. We have vacant buildings that will remain vacant for long periods of time and have been. So that, where do they fall in?
Well, they're listed there. I mean,
Where they can have some covering, because they try to dress up those windows, and they're going to be covered, which is actually better than just kind of a dirty old window you're looking at for years.
Where's it covered, Kathy?
it's in number 2 there.
Yeah, but that's under specific
Yeah,
situations.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Well-
not, that's not for,
Well, I don't think you want to just let vacant buildings have boards on the outside. Maybe you do. I mean, I thought that was kind of the point of this, is
Yeah.
not to let that just extend. And so, you know, they have to actively be pursuing something.
I guess the question is, how do we balance between not having the boarded up window look on our downtown versus not having an empty, dark hole of abandonment either, where we can encourage more
Yeah.
temporary aesthetic things to enhance the downtown experience, even though the building is abandoned or not in use.
Well, I think whether we like it or not, there's got to be some kind of a time frame, okay? And we can't just let it, go forever. We can't just say, okay, St. Cloud, it's going to take 2 years so they can do whatever they want. And that's, in a sense, not what we should be looking at, okay? I understand it's their building, it's their work that they're doing, but we still got to look at being able to see in and out of that place as things are going on, because somebody can get hurt in there and you can't see, okay?
Well, technically you can.
Huh?
Technically you
But
can.
there's parts of there that we're talking about and everything, so I think when we look at this, we need to look at with, in a sense, I don't have a problem with it as long as they've got permit that they're doing construction. If there's no construction going on, why do you need to cover it up?
Are we using our button?
Oh, sorry, Jim. This is new for me.
The language in that
Yes,
particular...
Councilman Meisner.
Thank you. Catherine, is it possible, and council, that we could take paragraph 2 and turn it around a little bit? I mean, essentially what we're trying to say is, we don't want windows boarded up unless maybe there's some conditions there of paragraph 2. Can we say that a window could actually be boarded up under these circumstances?
Under the fire, flood, and
Yeah. I mean, if it's not that, you can't board it up. You're going to have to do something else. I mean, we talk about all these aesthetics, but realistically, we're talking about this ugliness of a window being boarded up. And
Right.
can we just say that? That
Okay.
unless it's fire or earthquake or damage, it can't be boarded up.
Yes, you could say that. Yeah, I mean,
That's
yeah,
what we
it can't
want.
be obstructed unless it falls. See, so the way that it reads now is that it can't be, it can basically be obstructed for 30 days, right? That's kind of how the whole section reads. So you get like a grace period of 30 days. And then you can go beyond that 30 days if you fall into 1 or 2.
Right, because I think, if a building floods and they don't care to repair it in a timely manner, I mean, it could sit for 2 years with boards on the window because it flooded at one point.
So what you're suggesting, and I just want to make sure I understand, that you would take out the 30 days and it's like no obstructions at all unless you fall under these. And I just want to make sure that's what you're headed towards.
Well, relative to the issue at hand, which, like it or not, this whole thing started with boards on the windows. We're trying to eliminate that, let's just say that, and let's address that issue so that we're not stepping around the bush. And then if we want to address some other issues, we can do that as well as some aesthetics with coverings relative to fire and police safety. But
Okay, and, I think the caution is are you legislating towards one property? That's the issue, because we actually had, we had boarding up of windows language way back. I don't know if you remember, 6 to 9 months ago. It was no boarding of windows, and that was rejected by council for that exact reason. You didn't want to legislate for one property. And so-
Well, we also wanted to have an opportunity to communicate with that property owner and see if we could work something out. And after multiple attempts, that is not going to happen.
So if you want to go back to that, that's fine, just,
I think where my position is that the downtown merchants are opposed to the look, I don't know how to put this, other than a window being boarded up. And that's where I've kind of shifted my point, is that a point of any change here, while legally may be proved as targeting an individual business, my intent is I don't want windows on Main Street boarded up.
okay.
Unless it was an emergency situation and we can put a time frame in there that you need 14 days or something to get the boards out of there. But we all know that if something happens on Saturday afternoon, that window's going to get boarded up. That's
So-
practical and sensible.
We have Mayor would like to have something to say.
Oh, I think, I forgot.
Sorry, it took a while.
Yes. You can't just pull this out of the air. I believe there's got to be some rationale. Is that rationale we're looking, first of all, I look at it as a safety issue. And that's number one. And from there, then you can talk about coverings and stuff. Clearly, if your window is boarded up, I think that's an unsafe issue, unless it's prudent for a period of time till the next glass gets put in. But if there is a flame back there or somebody laying in the middle of the floor, I'd like to go back to the possibility of only a percentage covering of that window. Because I don't think you can see through what's now covering those two buildings that have the nice dioramas on them. You can't see through those. So what happens?
They
if
have
some-
some doorways and other windows that are opened up, so you
Okay.
can still peek into and see the building.
Okay, well, I mean, if your criteria is, the rationale that the public would understand is that we're doing this for safety, and here's the steps that we're going to get there. Number one, a totally boarded up, can't see through a window or door is not acceptable.
Okay,
Number
and
two,
this
so-
ordinance has that, right? Okay.
Okay.
Number two?
Number two would be a partial coverage or a changing of that design or artwork or something every 90 days. And I wouldn't have an objection to it if you could still have a portion that you could see through for safety. First of all, safety, we talked about, that was number one. A safety factor, a person could look in there or see a flame or see a body, for heaven's sakes, or something like that. Or they could continuously do it if that artwork was changed every 90 days.
Or maybe we're like 6 months, because that's expensive.
6 months, you
whatever.
pick it. But I think the main driver of this rationale is, first of all, safety. That's what we're talking about. And then everything falls underneath that category. And it sounds like we've done that. I just think boarding, you totally can't see through it. You can't break the dumb stuff. You have to bring your hammer and chisel to get it off. Is unsafe for firemen or anybody else that may have to get in there.
All right, Jim?
Two questions. I would maybe like to have some input, because we're so concerned about safety. I would like to get a professional opinion from our fire chief. The second question is, we're talking about being able to see in a building. How many buildings currently on Main Street would be impacted if we were to impose a regulation that required that when you walk past the building, you need to be able to see in the building?
Well, there have been a few, but some of those window coverings, it's been so long, they've kind of fallen down.
I'm just talking about regular businesses. Do we know?
Like, if you walk past
Like the
Brothers, I
new
don't think you
medical
can see
building.
inside.
The new medical building. Can you see inside of the new medical building from the street?
Well, that's a good point, yeah.
No.
Brothers, you can't see, and there's a lot of
Brothers.
places down there that.
I mean, I think if you go down Main Street, you're going to realize there's a reasonable number of businesses that you cannot see inside the building. And then my question is, where are you at with safety and security? Is the police department going in there randomly checking for dead bodies, and is the fire department randomly entering that building to check for a fire? And I think it's not.
But those buildings are occupied.
Not all the time.
There's that,
You don't know that the ones that are boarded are not occupied.
The fire chief wants to say something.
Fire
I
chief, go
invite-
ahead and come up to the mic.
This wasn't the topic of conversation I planned on being here for, but I don't want to
Glad
muddy
you're
the
here.
waters either. But there's been some points that have been raised, and I'll go back to start off with when we had the vacant and abandoned building project, and we looked at a number of occupancies within the city with the previous building inspector. And one of the things that we talked about at that time, and I'm not sure who might have it, if Kathy has that information, but we had actually looked at some standardized building security board-up parameters that are utilized across the country for vacant and abandoned buildings. Now, necessarily the building on Main Street at the 400 block is not necessarily considered in that realm. You know, one of the things that was looking for, they have standard board-up procedures for buildings that pose hazards to the community. They're unsecured, they have broken windows or broken doorways and what have you. So in that aspect, I believe there's definitely a need for securing those buildings, and possibly boarding up is the option that's typically looked at in a lot of those situations. Now, for a building that might be vacant, but not necessarily posing a threat to the community, the windows are intact, doors are intact and locked and what have you, you know, that doesn't necessarily constitute the board-up guidelines under that type of a program. Windows and visibility within buildings existing, and I think it was Councilman Meisner that brought this up, but a building does not have to have windows in it to start with. So looking at it on that respect, like the St. Cloud, if they have coverings over the windows from the interior, and the fire code, unless they're flammable coverings, there's some issues that might be addressed with that. But there's nothing in the life safety code that says you have to be able to see in a window to see the interior of the building. Now, if it's a window that's designed as an egress window, it has to be kept open and clear of obstructions and what have you. So when you look at businesses on Main Street that have the large picture frame type windows, under the fire code, and I believe under the building code as well, that there is no requirements in there that those windows can't be covered with some type of posters, pictures, decorative artwork, or what have you. So going forward on that, a couple of things that I think the council needs to be aware of moving forward on this decision, but there's probably ways to limit the board up of buildings, other than the occurrence of a hazard to the community. Most of the time, some of the buildings we had looked at during that vacant building program, you know, they were home to drug users. The buildings were open to anybody taking occupancy within the buildings. So those present one distinct problem. A viable building that's still secured by its regular means, glass and doors, is not necessarily fall into that category. So I hope that helped.
Yeah, well, we do have a provision that like residential neighborhoods are allowed to have boarded up windows in abandoned buildings for that reason. But we have a particular interest in maintaining a certain atmosphere in our downtown district. How does the council feel about moving forward as far as the no boards on windows unless there is an emergency? Maybe just leave
Well, do we want to
it at
say
that for right now.
something like, you know, with the exception of buildings that have active building permits and/or buildings that were damaged by fire, flood, or whatever, you cannot board up your window. You cannot
I
put
think we
boards
need to
on your
keep
window.
it simple and easy and not get too overbearing. And if the fire code says they can put posters and window coverings on their windows, then I think we should be in alignment with that as well. Chief Harvey?
Madam Mayor Pro Tem, one of the questions I asked Patrick just a second ago is what would prevent an individual who has windows in the downtown area from, instead of putting plywood over the top of them, obtaining a building permit and removing the windows altogether so that there are no windows? And he said that there's nothing in the code. So coming into this now, one of the thoughts that comes up with this, it seems like council's really struggling with regulatory enforcement of more or less a design, a certain type of atmosphere, as you put it, in the downtown corridor. And again, coming into this part a little bit later, has there been discussion about design or aesthetic review or some sort of standards? Because it seems like that's really what we're talking about here.
I think Patrick and Catherine, the conversation was that that would be under a different title. Is that right, to talk about the aesthetics?
Yeah,
and
well,
signs?
and you have to be, pretty careful with Reed versus Gilbert. You can't really deal with any content-based regulations when you start to talk about what's in the window and is it a sign and that kind of stuff. So you have to be kind of careful. And so that's why this is provisions written so, it doesn't matter, it's just boards, obstructions, that kind of thing. That's why it's written like that. But we will eventually reach the point where we'll have that discussion about posters in the windows.
Okay, Jim?
I would just reiterate, like it or not, this whole discussion on blocking windows stems from the appearance and the concerns, at least from my part at this point, of downtown and the ugliness that it presents when a window is boarded up. And everybody understands that if it's done because of an emergency, I think people can tolerate that. But when it's done because there's not an emergency, you need to find another way of closing that window and not boarding it up. And if that's what we're talking about, let's write some language that specifically address that from an aesthetic viewpoint.
And I do feel an obligation because we did tell the downtown citizens that if they came to city council and asked for an ordinance about boarded up windows, that we would listen to them. And they did come to city council, and that was a really long time ago. And I think we do need to address this. Let's at least get a thumbs up. Are we comfortable with the way it is written now with 1, 2, and 3, but maybe extending if you're under construction to a longer period of
It's too
time.
complicated. Why don't you just talk about boarding up windows?
Well, that's what these do,
Where?
Well, it's broader than
John?
that.
yeah.
Help me out.
Okay, go ahead, John.
Okay. All right, oh, I pushed my button. We're kind of going down a rabbit hole here. I mean, that's really what the problem is we're going down a rabbit hole. The issue for us is the ugly boards, okay? And because we're trying to be fair to everybody, we've thrown in, paper, plastic, other materials intended to block light, ventilation, and so we're kind of going off into space on this, it seems to me. I'm not sure what the fix is. I mean,
Get rid of the boards. I mean, that's what we're talking about. We don't want boards on windows. Just say that. Not an attorney, but it seems pretty simple. Can't we just say you can't put boards on windows unless you got fire or
Yes.
earthquake damage?
You absolutely can.
What's wrong with that, folks? Why can't we be that simple?
I think the only thing I would change is in paragraph 2, maybe put a time limit on that so that you're not just boarding up a window indefinitely
Right,
because there was a fire, 3 years ago.
Yeah, something that, 14 days or something. I mean, realistically, you have a business that's been damaged, you want to get it repaired as quickly as possible. Get Preston over there, nail the hammer, and, yeah, he can't hammer.
Well, and somewhat in support of the language of how it's been drafted, I mean, coming from Florida, people will find ways to board up or put metal coverings or other coverings over the window. And I think that was, I don't want to speak for Catherine on this, but I think that was the intent with this, is if we're trying to say, hey, don't cover your windows with stuff that obviously makes the downtown area look bad.
I agree.
That's part of the reason for having the additional information in there.
But we would agree with you, let's just start with boards.
yeah.
And see where it goes. I mean, that's,
Okay with
If
that.
someone gets more creative than that, we can come back.
Okay, so thumbs up for just addressing boards for right now. Thumbs up?
Yeah.
Thumbs up.
thank you.
Do you need any more information as we proceed to,
Well, they'll draft something, bring it back to us.
I think between Catherine, Derek, and myself, we can draft something.
okay, well, we have not gotten very far
Yeah, we have.
in Title VIII, but I
The
think
the
we're-
rest of these are fairly minor changes, so hopefully this will go a little
Okay.
bit faster. Section 8.26.010 littering. At the last council meeting, it was asked that we changed by immediately to without notice, that we change transport to dispose, and that we change removed to disposed of.
Yeah. Good.
Under section, before I go on, any questions about that, or are we, okay?
we'll pipe in if we have questions.
Yeah, we'll stop you.
Yeah.
Okay. Under section 8.30.010, we changed spray booth to enclosed space. Council wanted a slightly broader term used in that paragraph.
Jim, did you have a question?
Well, I think when I read it, is that unless conducted inside an approved enclosed space, what does that mean?
Generally speaking, if you're talking about painting of an automobile, you're going to have some state requirements for how you mitigate the fumes and whatever noxious chemicals are used as part of the actual application of the paint. And I think that would be where the approval comes in, that there's a state approval that happens.
So if you're in your garage, I don't think.
Right.
the
No, my
state
point
knows
is
you're
if
painting a
the
car
chief's in his
or
garage,
cares.
which he could have been last
Not a
night,
commercial operation.
spraying,
Yeah.
he would be in violation. Is that correct?
Technically, yes.
Are we approving it?
We are not the approval agency for a proper spray booth, and I think that's, what we can do is remove the word approved and
Approved,
just
and
say
then it's just
enclosed
approved,
space.
yeah.
Word approved.
Because if we're not the ones approving it, then we really can't enforce it.
So let's move that word. Are we at a thumbs up on the? Moving approved, okay. All right, carry on.
Under 8.30.020, inoperable motor vehicles, we added the language, enterprise is exempt from the requirements of section 8.30.10 or 010.
Why is it rated?
I think we're good.
Okay. Under 8.38.010 sidewalks and gutters, we removed "and/or any portion of the right-of-way outside the travel portion of said right-of-way" and replaced it with "or any portion of the right-of-way between the sidewalk and the designated on-street parking."
Jim, do you have a question?
Does that make sense, Chief? I mean, when you're driving down the street and you look at a vehicle, would your staff be able to interpret that correctly there?
I believe so. So if it's on their property rather than the right-of-way, it would fall under code enforcement. If it falls in the right-of-way, then it would be an obstruction that the police officers would actually handle.
So on my street, there, to the best of my knowledge, after being there 20 years, I don't ever recall there being a sign that says that I can park on my street.
You don't have to have a sign.
Well, but this says designated.
Yeah, but you can park anywhere as long as there's a sign that says you're prohibited.
I don't know about that with the term designated. Madam Attorney?
I don't think it's, yeah, I agree with
Because
Frank.
like I say, you can park,
You can park in any public
It says
street.
you can't.
but on Fish Street, that's why we've got Fish Street marked on the west side that says no parking for that whole block.
Yeah.
Because that's for safety purposes and that. So,
It's permitted unless prohibited.
Is that correct, Attorney?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
It says designated. On designated
We don't designate.
street parking, would that not suggest that
Unless prohibited.
any street that doesn't have a sign designate street parking, you could not park there, technically?
I'm not sure what your parking restrictions say regarding the designation of on-street
We only
parking.
have a few, they're largely in the downtown.
So would it read better if it was just between the sidewalk
Where we
and
do,
on-street parking?
I would buy that.
Okay.
So Patrick, we're going to delete
Designated.
designated,
Yeah.
or the designated. Do you see that?
Is that a problem, Chief?
No, I don't think so.
Any other questions from
And
council?
Just remove the word designated?
Yeah.
Permitted.
Okay. 8.42,
8.42.010, enforcement and penalties. There was a lot of discussion at the January 23rd about making sure that tenants would be notified if we have information and reason to believe that a property is occupied by a tenant rather than an owner. So we have modified this language to delete a responsible party and replace it with the owner. As reflected in the, remove the word county and just put real estate records of the county assessor, since it's a bit redundant to have county in there twice. And then add the language, and to the tenant, if applicable, at the tenant's address.
is that good?
Yeah, that was our intent.
Okay, so are we ready to move on to page
We
33?
are ready to move on to page 33.
So we are going to page 33, and we'll just go ahead and start. And if anybody has any suggestions for the, as we go through each page, then we'll address it page by page. Jim?
Item G, we're gonna delete that?
Yeah, you're a court of record, so that doesn't need to be
Okay.
in there.
Thank you.
Any other questions on 33? Okay, 34. I do have something on 34 and number 5. It was crossed out that such guidelines shall be approved by the city council, and it was crossed out. And I kind of prefer having some sort of check and balance, and including a city council opportunity to weigh in, instead of just being based upon the city administrator or other new designee. That's just my personal.
What is guidelines for fines? Is that the same thing as the schedule for fines, or is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I concur with Councilman Smith that, and I thought we were already doing that as part of the ordinance process, that we were approving those fines?
We have been, but we would not with this.
But yeah, this would change that.
Yeah.
I think we need to balance of powers, if there is a power.
So let's go through city, Jim says reinstate city council approval, John
Or don't
Hamrick.
delete it, however you
Yeah.
want to
Yeah,
say
don't
that.
delete it. Yeah,
Don't delete it.
I think don't delete it. I mean, the last time it was approved was 2014 or something like that, so it's not like it has to happen every other week.
Okay, Mayor?
Well, I think the mayor should get some kind of chore. I'm fine.
Amanda?
So are we talking about?
So actually, sorry, I apologize. The reason why that's being deleted is because if you look at the second to last sentence in paragraph 5, it says such guidelines and fine schedule shall be approved by city council.
This was
So-
just moved.
I'm sorry, it was repetitive, but I couldn't find where it was repetitive, so I didn't want to say that.
Okay. All right, so we are good.
So we're good.
Okay, page 35.
Thank you, Catherine.
Sorry about that.
Just a typo on number 8, the last line. No space between by and discontinuing.
I saw that too. Okay. 36. I just had a question on 36 on A1. It has the actual cost of abatement plus 15%. Now, it was just a question, what's done with that 15%?
It's Tony's bonus.
Yeah. It's just administrative overhead. If you want to eliminate it, it's not going to be that significant. It's just staff time for dealing with the matter.
Okay.
Staff time costs of money.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. I was just curious
Yeah.
what the justification was. Okay, any other questions for 36?
Well, the only problem I have is that had the occupant corrected the problem prior to this process, we would have re-inspected anyways, correct? So it's like a penalty.
Yeah, but this only happens after the court actually orders abatement.
Right.
And we go in.
But if we issue a violation,
Uh-huh.
and then you fix the problem, we're going to come out and inspect it anyways and make sure you did it.
Yeah.
Right? And we're not going to charge you for that inspection. But now we're going to take you to court and penalize you and charge you.
Yes.
Should have fixed it.
But you
Because
didn't
they've
fix it.
already
You
exhausted
hadn't
the
fixed
other.
it.
We got to prove to the judge you haven't fixed it still.
You've generated enormous more
But you've
staff
gotten,
time.
haven't you not got some kind of a penalty for not fixing it?
This is the penalty for not fixing it.
Yeah,
So
'cause you're going to
if we
court.
go back out and re-inspect and it has not been fixed and we take the person to court and we get the order of abatement, that's where this section comes in. That means they've done nothing this whole time.
I realize that.
Okay,
But the 15% is for the inspection portion. And you would have inspected it anyways.
no, it's not just for the inspection and portion. There's a lot that staff does in order to
'Cause
get
you're
the abatement order,
going to
to
court.
organize the contractors that come in and do the abatement.
And
They're
then
on
the
site.
liens that will get filed against the property as
Yeah,
a result of
there's a
that.
lot
That
more than just the
15% is
inspection.
covering the overhead associated with
Yeah.
all of those factors.
Remember, about 1/10 of 1% go through this process.
And the regular taxpayer should not pay for that for one person's negligence. Any other questions on page 36? 37?
Wait a minute. Why is
Yes,
these buttons
Jim
do-
Joe, go ahead.
What happens if there's a fifth? Is that covered somewhere?
If
I mean,
there's
what
a-
happens if you got a problem child that's going beyond this?
I don't think it is covered. I had to look at the fine schedule, but I
I
don't
mean,
think it is covered.
what do we do?
Just keep repeating 4.
Like the first incident we started with, wasn't that beyond the number 5?
Oh, it probably was. But, I mean, eventually it comes to the point where you do actually get it solved. I mean, I've never seen one continue and continue like
Okay.
this.
Yeah.
I mean, eventually you rack up so many liens on the property and they won't pay your taxes that it will go into, we'll either foreclose on it or it'll go to tax sale.
Are you good?
Sure.
38? 39? Well, we do have,
Well, we've switched into chapter
Yeah.
9, so.
okay, well, and Fire Chief wanted to have his weigh in on the fireworks as well.
Actually, I didn't see anything, fire chief band issue was one of the things that I looked at in some of the fireworks. It looks like they changed the state statute numbers in relation to fireworks, so. But I didn't see anything in this section, in the fire ban section. I think the wording that's been replaced in that is more directly in line with what the fire district uses for the wording for the different stages of fire ban. And I'm glad to see the penalty phase added to that, or increased to that, more definition to that as well, so. I'm just scrolling through it again now as we're looking at it, so.
Great. We're good.
If you have
Okay.
questions, I'll be happy to answer anything.
Patrick, did you want to do any introduction to Title IX before we keep moving on?
Is fires in 9, open fires?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
So this is currently in 8, and we're moving it into 9?
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so that's part of the whole reorg, so
Right,
we're going to get
right.
into the shifting of things now. So we're moving it into Title IX.
We're still on 8,
So
moving to 9.
we've now concluded the review of Title 8, and subsequent to the...
Congratulations, finally
About to
did
go
it.
home now.
All right, let's get through 9.
Good luck.
Are we ready to,
Walk through
yeah,
it.
Chief Harvey?
So Councilman Meisner's comments concerning subsequent violations beyond the 4th, we actually do have 2 properties in town that would be beyond their 4th violations. Would it be appropriate or acceptable to put up in there upon the 4th or subsequent violations so that there are continuing penalties beyond
We
the 4th?
can do that. Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so let's move on. Are there any questions starting in Title IX, page 39?
You turned off my button, didn't you?
It's not, you're not showing up. But you can speak.
Not an accident.
Go ahead.
Item A, all of that verbiage is the same right now, and we're just moving it, is that
Under
correct?
what section? Sorry.
95860, item A. And
Yes.
those exclusions or,
Yeah.
Yes. Anything that's not
Prohibition.
red
You don't
lined
see red,
is,
it's the same.
it's the same.
Nobody's bleeding, it's
so, it is then lawful to discharge a BB gun or an air rifle in the city limits?
That's covered under a different part of the code, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
I've read the code, and I know that I have an air rifle, and I've noted with care that discharging air rifles is not permissible under the code. Maybe not under this part of the code, but it's not permissible.
Well, that was my assumption, that discharging BB guns and air rifles was prohibited. But when I read this, I was confused, because I thought I'd read it before somewhere.
Firearms
There's a section
and
under
explosives.
firearms.
In truth, even discharging a bow and arrow would be considered a projectile under that same part of the code.
And a snowball.
And, yeah.
Don't go there, Tony.
Okay.
Do we need any language? Do we have any shooting ranges in city limits?
No.
Okay. Could we
Well-
at some point that would cause an issue? I mean, do we need to say,
I
like,
think it would be a
unless you're...
zoning, would be a zoning.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
not sure it's allowed in the zone.
So
I have no idea.
is the Division of Wildlife property behind PCC that's outside? Okay.
What about, there is bow hunting.
Oh, at the area has,
South 9th Street,
yeah.
South Ninth Street. But we have bow hunting for our deer harvesting.
it's inside.
Right, so somehow it must be allowed.
What?
Bow
Yeah, I
hunting for
just-
deer harvesting, urban deer harvesting.
I don't think
Do you have a copy of the code there? There's a special provision just for guns, weapons.
I was looking up shooting ranges, and I'm not seeing it
No, there's no.
permitted at all within C commercial.
There's a discharging of firearms and rifles misdemeanor section.
Yeah.
Any person who in the city discharges a firearm of any kind or an air rifle when not acting in the line of duty or authorized by law is guilty of a misdemeanor. Is that what we're talking about?
Where's that at?
956010?
So we're,
We're not seeing it because we're moving this to 9.
What you're looking at here are
you
the
don't-
sections of Title 8 that are being dumped into Title 9.
Yeah,
Part
you
of
don't
the-
have all of 9 in
The
front,
junk
not like
drawer
8.
reorganization.
sense.
Okay, so that
Sorry.
does help clarify some things. All right, do we have any questions for page 40?
Well, is 958 redundant then with 956?
Yeah, I'm going to take a look at that and make sure
Sounds
that,
like it could be redundant, because it's coming out of Title 8, going to 9, and if 9's already addressing discharge of firearms,
yeah, we may need to meld those together.
there could be some redundancy.
Good catch.
That whole Section A.
Yes.
Okay, anything else on page 40? 41. Jim?
I just got a question for somebody. And like if you have a fire in a fire ring, or what constitutes where they talk about a metal fireplace?
It's under D.
I don't know why I didn't mark that, but. My point is if I have a little rock area in my backyard and I build a little bonfire, I'm technically in violation. Is that correct?
No.
Why not?
Because of D2. D2. So you've built a permanent structure, a fire ring, and so you're accepted.
Is that current code now, Chief? Because there's been an incident of an individual that I know that was visited by your group because there was a fire in a backyard in a metal container without a burn permit.
And the problem comes into with the further classification definition of some of these items, and it's a permanently constructed is the key words there. We have people that get a 55-gallon metal drum and burn in that, which is not a permanently constructed fire ring or fireplace assembly. There's, I believe, further in the code requires that any type of permanently constructed outdoor fireplace has to have a flue chimney assembly that meets the standards of NFPA as well, so.
So if I go down to one of our big box stores or whatever and buy me one of those metal things that are made for having a patio fire, that would not be legal, is that correct?
If you.
Because it's not permanent.
During a fire ban.
Tomorrow.
Yep, during a fire ban, burning of wood products in an open metal ring is not allowed.
But how about if I went tomorrow and bought me one of those fire pits at one of the local stores and went
Are you
home?
talking a gas fire pit or a,
No,
Well, they have
Would-
them both ways. They have them
Yeah.
gas and they have them-
right, but they make them
Yep.
to actually build a fire in with a little screen over the top.
Yeah.
typically, if we're in a fire ban, even the metal rings you can buy at Tractor Supply or what have you, would not be allowed during a fire ban if you're burning wood products in it.
I don't
But
care
they
about the
would
fire
be
ban.
allowed if there's not a fire ban.
Tomorrow.
Correct.
If there's not a fire ban, they're allowed, correct. Now, some of the other things that are addressed in not only our fire ban regulations, but at the federal level as well, part of that comes from the federal side where they have developed campgrounds and they have developed
Right.
fireplaces, fire pits there, which are typically a masonry fire pit. Depending on the level of fire ban, we have 3 levels that might or might not be allowed. At the higher level, with the higher fire danger, none of that is allowed. But even at the first level, open outdoor burning under the fire ban regulations that we have in place of wood products that can create ashes and embers, anything like that, is not allowed. Now, the exception to that is if it's a constructed fireplace assembly or manufactured fireplace assembly that has a flue assembly attached to it that allows those embers and ashes to cool as they rise, and they're contained within that flue assembly. We have fun every year when we go into a fire ban, believe me.
So
Interpretation is difficult.
does The second portion of sentence 2, where it starts with metal fireplace, does that cover the fact that I'm going to go to Walmart and buy me a little one of those $50 fire pits, take it at home and make a fire in my backyard, you're not going to show up?
In our opinion, it does not count. It's not, a fireplace, definition of a fireplace is different than a fire ring assembly. A fireplace is typically a unit that does have, like a chimenea,
Okay.
would be similar to that. A fireplace has a flue assembly attached to it. So if we come out and it's not a fireplace, it's an open fire ring, whether it's stone or a metal ring, it would not be allowed during a fire ban.
But it would be allowed if there was not a fire ban.
Right, if there's not a fire ban, yes, you can do that.
Fire ban takes care of all those little...
I'm not asking about a fire ban, I'm asking about tomorrow afternoon.
Well, you can do it, that's what
So-
I'm
But this
saying.
section is about fire bans.
Yeah.
You can do it.
You can
Yeah, so
do
you
it.
can do it.
Go and do it, Jim.
We even
It
send you the
doesn't say
weenies.
fire bans, it says open burning, ma'am.
This section is to lay the basis for what a fire ban would apply to.
It says open burning.
I understand it says open burning, but the premise of this, of the provision is to deal with fire bans.
And item D says open burning
I
means,
understand what it says at the top, Jim. The title is not determinate of what the section necessarily fully entails. We don't put everything in the title.
So I believe this, and the way I interpret it, is the definition of what open burning is, and later in the regulation, it states that during fire bans or restrictions, open burning is not allowed.
right, I don't have a problem with that.
So
That means it's
Catherine,
allowed now. As long as there's no fire ban, it's allowed.
Yeah.
Is that what item D says?
This, I mean, it's very similar to what we have in our wording on that. So this is the definition of what open burning is, including welding and what have you, wood burning stoves and all that. So it's not allowed only when a fire ban or restriction is put in place.
Right.
Item D is just a definition, so that when he puts a ban in place and it says no open burning, you can look at that definition and see what's allowed and what's not allowed under the ban.
Thank you.
Okay.
any other questions on page 41? 42?
Madam Mayor Pro
Oh, wait,
Tem,
let's
I
go
just
ahead.
have one question for council, the city attorney. So the enforcement of this particular section, because it talks about the different types of offenses, but not necessarily who the regulatory authority is, would that also fall within the fire department, or would code enforcement or the police department be responsible for enforcing violations of this?
Code.
So I think I mean, I think it's a difficult question to answer, but I think if there's a violation of the fire district's ban, it is possible that that will be brought in county court, I believe, by the fire district, by the DA.
Yeah, well, typically what happens, because we're in the county and the city, I have an agreement that the city signs on to when I look to enforce a ban. Usually, like Tony will have a discussion. I'm thinking about the ban. So the city will actually enact, through a previous process in the old regulations, I guess, I don't remember if it's in this one as well, he will enact an order within the city that puts the fire ban in place in conjunction with the district. Now, the county does the same thing. So the problem we have as a fire district is we don't have the enforcement arm. So even in the past, the city law enforcement would cite the people under the existing
cities.
city ordinances.
Okay.
And then the county would cite under the county ordinances. So they would go to either county court or city court, depending on
Okay.
where the
Yeah.
violation
So
occurred.
because it's a
Police.
city ban, you're in charge.
Yeah, but it wouldn't be a code enforcement issue, it's a police issue.
Right.
So it would be a criminal violation then,
Yeah.
and police department. So would code enforcement also have the authority? They would
Do
not?
not want them involved with
Okay.
this.
Why not?
They already have a
That's a
bad enough
criminal activity.
reputation enforcing weeds, I don't need them
I
to,
thought you had told us earlier that it wasn't your guys' choice to determine which you would and which you would not enforce. Have we not had that conversation?
Well, it's who's going
the
to.
difference is whether we enforce it, not who enforces it. In this case, we've always indicated the police would enforce this law.
But under
It's
the
out
new-
of the realm of responsibility of a code enforcement officer. They're handling weeds, abandoned cars, things of that nature. This is a much more serious violation.
The only reason why I'm bringing it up is on page 43, it talks about that the city may also seek an injunction, abatement, or restitution, and the police department would not, a normal police officer would not understand the process for abatement.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm advocating for allowing code enforcement to be able to enforce at least portions of this.
Most people, if a cop shows up and tells you to put out a fire, you're putting it out. I've never seen a situation where someone did not abide by that presence. You know, I don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill.
This is only under fire ban situations,
Yeah.
right? So you would prefer code enforcement to enforce fire ban?
It's not one
Violations?
over the other. It's essentially whether or not they would have the ability to do it as well.
We don't want
But if the city administrator is saying that it should be under the purview of the police department, then that's where
A
we're
lot of
at.
the violations will be at night. They don't work at night. On the weekends, they don't work on the weekends. The police are 24/7 operation. Code enforcement is not. And it puts them in a situation which they're not accustomed to, in environments they're not accustomed to. It just doesn't make sense. I've never had them do that type of work.
So then, could we maybe, how does the process work as far as if they have to persecute somebody for it? Does it happen right then and there, or is that?
I've dealt with this before. A police officer just shows up and says, "Put the fire out," and they do.
But hypothetically, they say, "Screw you." Do you, are you?
Officer can deal with that matter when they're dealing with the individual, but if you don't think they're going to respect a police officer over a code enforcement officer,
Well, where I'm going with this is, could
Yeah.
the police officers maybe be the first contact, and then if, you know, it has to go to court and there's paperwork and follow-up, could then code enforcement handle it from there? That way
no,
they're
it has to
not-
be the party that issued the citation.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, this rarely happens. Where I have seen it happen, people immediately abide by what the officer said.
And to add on top of that just a little bit, I mean, typically, we respond out to many open burning violations,
Yeah.
during burn bans and what have you, and we don't necessarily look to write a person up from the beginning. Most of the time, they're compliant. A lot of times, they're not even aware of the burn ban or that they need a special permit to do their open burning. But if we do have a problem with someone, we're going to call law enforcement in.
Yeah.
Because
They
it's
use the
typically,
sheriff if we
we've
do
had
something.
situations where there's been threats of violence as well, if you think we're going to put this fire out and things like that. So it's kind of, you know, we typically rely on the sheriff's office if it's in the county or the local, or Canyon PD if it's in the city.
All right, Jim?
I'm still a little confused. If you drive by my house tonight, and I have a fire in my backyard, under what code or definition do you have the right to stop in today and question me about my fire?
On the fire district side of things, we have enacted a open burning permit program. So you have to have a permit, first of all, and then you have to call one of the fire stations to determine if the conditions are favorable for you to actually have either a recreational fire in your backyard, or you're going to burn your ditch row, or burn your debris that you've cleaned your yard up over the wintertime. So there's a process in place for that. Now, on that side of things with the burn permit process, our course of action at that point is, if they're burning outside of those regulations on just a regular basis, we would take them through the court system on our side of things. It's not, there's no burn ban in effect at that time. It's just a regular burn process that we, the fire district, have adopted a number of years ago. So to add to the safety of the community, an individual, anybody can burn, there's no fee for the permit, it's just a process to ensure that the burning is done safely. So if we come to your house because you have a bonfire in the backyard, and you have a permit and didn't call it in, or you don't have a permit and did not call it in, we will advise you of the burning regulations and what you need to do to keep that fire going. Now, depending on the situation, time of year, we might let you go with that recreational fire, if that's what it is, but you'll need to get to the station the next day. Typically, the recreation fires are at night. Our office isn't open, so we can't get a permit issued to you. That's typically what would happen in that.
Yeah, so
you can,
I have one of those permits. It's really easy. You just drop in, sign a paper, they send you home with paperwork.
So you
just
have
put
a
it in.
permit that allows open burning in a non-fire ban situation.
Yeah.
You still have to
But
let
I was
them
just
know.
told that open burning is in this regulation for the purposes of fire bans.
Because the city doesn't do open burning permits. That's a fire district function. We don't have anything to
Okay.
do with that.
the way the regulation works is the open burning, that definition there, just identifies what's considered open burning. And then when you look at the burn restriction notices, it'll say that open burning is not allowed from this date until taken away. So
I
the open
understand.
burning goes back to the items identified in the definition, outdoor welding, even using wood-fired smokers, different things like that. So it's identified as to what is open burning.
So I think part of the problem is we don't have the entirety of Title IX, and so maybe there's some gaps.
This is the only section that talks about open burning. The definition is simply used in the event there is a ban. If there's no ban,
Then-
this
Not our
definition
business.
is not
Yeah.
operating, basically.
Are you feeling more comfortable now, Councilman Meisner?
That's not what it says, but
Well, hold on a second, because it's just a definition, so I'm confused by you saying that's not what it says. I guess I'm not following when, it's
well,
just simply,
would you read item D for me, ma'am?
it's just a definition of what open burning is. That's all it is. It's just a definition. It doesn't say what's allowed, what's not allowed. It's simply a definition, just a defined term. That's all it is. That's all D is. It's not a regulation in and of itself. But
I
that
think-
term is then used when a ban is put in place.
I think we're getting to the point where we overdo what we read and what we're seeing. You know, with the language, you can have one thing in there that says this and that, but in the total concept of it, common sense, somewhere along the line has to play a part. So open burning consists with the fire ban, you know, and that's what it is. And let's don't try to put something into it that isn't there.
So let's move on to page
Thank you.
42.
And I think, I'm sorry, Ashley, but I think it's section, I don't know if we're there yet, 9.60.020, kind of addresses, I think, what Jim's trying to address there. So it talks about whenever the city administrator initiates a fire ban.
I understand
Because
that.
of conditions.
I don't care about the ban.
Okay.
I think I'm less confused. Mr. Hawk has helped me out tremendously.
Page 42, any questions? 43?
Wait a minute, on 42.
42. Page 42, Jim Meisner.
So what does 9.6.05 mean? That's during an order, right? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Is everybody good? Page 43. 44.
Well, before we come to the, go ahead.
Go ahead, ma'am.
No, I was just going to say, before we get to 15.42, I just wanted to explain what was going on there.
Okay.
But I didn't know if Jim had more comments on it.
I'm good, thank you.
And by the way, Fire Chief Delvecchio, thank you for being here today. It's been very helpful to have your expertise and collaboration.
My pleasure.
All right, Kathy, go ahead and give Catherine.
So I just wanted to explain that, again, this new 15.42, this fire protection and EMS impact fee, is simply being moved. So if you don't see red lines, nothing's changed, it's just moving from title 8 to Title 15.
Okay.
Do we have item B?
The one that starts with specific authority?
Well,
Well, that's
it's C.
technically A.
I don't know what it is. It's,
Tied
it's-
into the
right.
distribution of any impact fees?
Do we have that IGA?
I believe the IGA does cover that. It's from,
There is, yeah, there is I think, might have been '06, I believe. There was an IGA established with the city and the county, because the county collects the impact fee for us in the county jurisdictions. The city collects the impact fee for us here, and there's a 3% fee that the city is paid on every impact fee that they collect.
Okay, are we good for 43? 44. 45. 46.
How old are those fees? I got that note there. I'm not sure.
I believe it was enacted in 2006. There was a study done in 2005. It was implemented, I believe, in '06. And actually, not that it's relevant right now, but we're actually contemplating updating that whole fee schedule based on current economic conditions and what have you, so.
But that's a fee that we're setting, the city, at least?
No, we said,
We just
we just collect it because we collected at the time of building permits?
We collect the use tax of the county, we collect the impact fee of the fire department, because they don't have that kind of financial function.
We adopted that in 2005 originally, so this is original language from '05.
I mean, I would just suggest, one of the problems we're running into is the city establishes fees and schedules and taxes, and we never change them, and then 10 years down the line, we want to triple them. And if we would do incremental cost of living increases, we can achieve some of the same effects without the same hassles and headaches.
yeah, and the impact fee requires a study to be done to assess the economic conditions in the area, what the growth potential is, and different factors like that. And then typically a third-party entity does that study, then they will come back with the recommendations as to where those fees should go. So we have discussed this on the fire district side of things, of readdressing this issue. They've actually just changed the state statutes last year, I believe, on impact fees for fire districts. Not that it changed any of the process there, just it gave them a broader range to enact impact fees, basically, so.
Okay, that's good to know. 47. 48. 49. 50.
Bingo.
Now we are on to the general violation process. And I have two things. One is from Hamrick, and he, on number 3, if violation found, he has notice of violation mailed to property owner, and he'd like to include tenant and tenant. And would we have anything in this where, I know it is in a different place, but an attempt for a face-to-face visit?
So that's that administrative guideline thing we keep talking about.
Yeah.
I can't.
And, wait, hold on, let me open it up here for a second. And I think currently it does kind of indicate, and I don't know how strong the language is, and maybe you want to make it stronger, that there should be some kind of contact face-to-face to obtain, voluntary compliance.
What's the will of the council?
I thought we addressed that in,
It's kind of addressed in a different place. I just didn't know if we wanted that in this diagram.
So typically that kind of stuff doesn't appear in the code, right? So it appears in that administrative guidelines. And so right now, I think it says code enforcement officers shall encourage voluntary compliance from responsible parties who own or occupy property. So issuance and service of a written notice of violation shall be an acceptable means of encouraging voluntary compliance if the code enforcement officers are unable to meet directly with the responsible parties. Reasonable efforts should be made to adequately describe the reasonable party the minimum steps that must be taken in order to come into compliance or abate a nuisance. So that's currently in your policy now, and you can certainly beef up that language if you want to get more descriptive.
Jim?
My problem is, in my personal belief, which I have no documentation to verify this other than talking to citizens, historically, staff have opted to not contact people and to issue them those verbal warnings, which I would hope, under the new process with the chief, somebody could change that process.
It's not that they don't try, it's usually the hours of operation.
I disagree.
Most people
We
work.
can leave it at that.
So I guess that question is, do you want to beef up that language on the general bio? On here.
Well, it's in policy. Is this even policy, or is it just?
No, that's just
No,
your,
it's just a,
but there is actually a policy in your packet.
yeah.
That's this one?
No. It should say, like, Exhibit A at the top, guidelines with
Okay,
respect to.
I see that.
Okay. So what I read to you was number 2 there.
Does it, council have any, it has it in there. Do you want to beef it up, or are we good with the way it is?
Can we say, instead of, if the code enforcements are unable to meet directly with the responsible parties, have wording something like best attempt made rather than just unable?
Well, we could add something that's, that basically is a little bit more affirmative, that the first attempts, should
Right.
be in-person communications with the
Because
person rather
unable
than.
doesn't necessarily mean anything, It could be that it was raining and they were unable to walk to the door, I mean,
Okay.
but something along the lines of like best attempt to make face-to-face contact, or however we want to word it.
And do you want to add language for both responsible parties includes owner and tenant?
Well, I think if you read item 1, it's suggesting, even though it's written, that we're going to actually try to contact people. And I think item 2 is indicated that item 1 wasn't successful. So therefore, we're going, and that's why it starts out with a written notice.
Well,
But I
and-
think item 1 is suggesting that they're going to actually try to talk to somebody.
Because in number 2, a notice of violation is just a warning. It's not an actual citation. And so a perfect example is Brad and I were home all day long, and someone left a note on our door rather than knocking to tell us that the weeds were high. Well, the weeds weren't on our property, and had they knocked on our door, we could have said, that's not our property, and it could have been resolved right then and there. But nobody ever did that.
That's such an interesting philosophy.
So at number 1 of, you've done that when it says that a code violation have been
But see,
observed and shall attempt to communicate.
Where 2, it says the issuance and service of a notice of violation means they're handing that notice of violation, and I think in that, there should be best attempt to.
All right, so Catherine, can you add that in?
Well, could
language in
we
there?
maybe say on there where it says communicate directly in person? I mean,
Well,
that's the
it's not always going
problem.
to be possible.
Right, well, their attempt,
When possible.
Yeah.
It says
Or best
attempt.
Or when possible, or however you want to word it, but the chief would like to say something.
Chief?
So I would just put out for food for thought for council that if we prescribe something that is too stringent and structured, it may not account for some of those circumstances where a property owner owns property, this is a second home,
And
and
is
they
not
live
there
in
all the time.
Maryland, for example. I mean, if it's Hawaii, I'll go deliver the notice
Yeah,
in
in
person,
person.
but,
That's why I think if you just do best attempt,
yeah.
it's saying in there, we want you to make face-to-face contact if it's at all possible. If it's not, it's not, but you should be making an attempt to.
what did I suggest?
I don't know.
Catherine is going to give us some language.
Well, I'll draft up some language for you to consider
And then,
on your comment.
and on number 4, we, in other places, we had about having compliance, and it talks about within 10 days. Do we need to change that to 10 business days, or? So maybe just add business for clarification. It's kind of good for business, because if someone gets that notification, it says 10 business days, and they get it on a Friday, that could be a little bit stressful if it's not clarified. All right, so I'm going back to John Hamrick's suggestion of talking about notifying the tenant or face-to-face. Do you want it on the flow chart, or are we good with it just being in the ordinance?
Would seem to me like with all the changes that we're making in that particular department, that some of that stuff's going to change
That
under
flow chart
under
may
the new
change.
supervision, and, have the supervisor of that department bring us back some suggestions and see if that system can be improved from where it was at, which wouldn't take a whole lot.
And I think if we have that anywhere, it should be in the guidelines of,
Okay.
staff guidelines, because that's who's doing it.
All right.
Is this part of, this isn't part of the code though, right? It's only policy,
Yeah.
No, that's not part of the code. That's part of the.
administrative policy.
And part of that on the memorandum, this one right here, memorandum, it has regarding protocol for noncompliance. Number 3 in the parentheses, it says even if responsible party was contacted, maybe for grammatical reasons, even if a responsible party was contacted. That was from John Hamrick.
Okay.
Of course it does.
Are there any other things throughout the rest of this document? I think we've covered just about all of it, unless you have anything else you see.
If I can quickly prepare you for what you'll see in 2 weeks, quickly, if you're ready for it.
You're giving us a spoiler alert?
I want you to be prepared. So we're going to be starting drainage, stormwater, and floodplain regulations, which is the final 3 components of Chapter 8 that are being moved. And they're going to be moved into brand new titles. I think you might recall we talked about that. They're going to be in separate titles, so you'll be getting that in your packet.
I am
So
so
prepare for that.
excited.
There aren't too many pages. It's not like Title 8. So.
Well, this has been a long process, and Patrick, thank you for your longevity and patience. Thank you, Chief Harvey, for being present. I think it was really important to have you here tonight.
Thank you.
And for your input as well, so you're starting to take on a pretty big task.
Yeah, I don't know if it's an option.
I think he texted me, wanted me to transfer code enforcement to the street division.
I'll take IT. They're a lot less work. No, we'll definitely, give it our best. And the same philosophy that we enforce criminal statutes with, we'll enforce code enforcement violations with.
Let's keep the communication open as we proceed forward, make sure that we are being as reasonable as we can and make this streamlined and user-friendly as we can. And speaking of IT, thank you, IT, for our little name.
Chase.
Yeah,
He's a library guy.
Oh, that's not.
Patrick, I
nice.
appreciate your efforts and diligence and flexibility and patience in working with us and all the revisions and changes.
All right, pat on your back. This is big. All right, we are adjourned.